Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. We've got questions from Cardo. All right. Hello, Cardo. Cardo says, "Hi, Eddie. I hope you're doing well. I am. Thank you. Um, how can I open my sound in the gigs when I try to play louder? My lips can't hold the position, and my notes break apart." Um, you guys have heard me talk about a lot. You guys have heard me talk a lot about that balance. It's a physical balance, and it's a huge physical balance. In other words, well, huge is the wrong word. It's a very complicated, extremely complicated balance. And that balance, okay, let me say more about that. So, when I'm talking about it, I usually say stuff like it's beyond our capability. I say it all the time. I'm always wishing I had a better way to say it. There is, and the balance is very, very complicated. It's a complication. I mean, it involves the air, it involves all the muscles in the face, it involves how open or closed your jaw is, it involves how up, how high or low your tongue is, and all of those in uh, collaboration open or close your oral cavity. It has to do with your posture. It has to do with how you hold the horn. It has to do with the angle of the horn. When I say that balance is beyond our mental capabilities, that's what I'm talking about. And what you're talking about here, how to open up your sound, is the end result of that balance. So when when we're struggling with those things on the gig, there's nothing we can quote unquote do to fix it. Because everything we try to do is going to be dealing with the conscious mind, not the subconscious mind. So what we can do is have stuff that we change the way we think, change not change what we think, but change the way we think. Okay, one of the things we can do to open up our sound is to make sure that you're doing an and I'm sure you already are, Cardo. You probably heard me say this dozens of times. The most important thing is to saturate your ears with the sound of great trumpet playing. Now you're talking about playing loud, and when you play loud, when the listening you need to do involves listening to great players playing loud, and it has to be in the genre that you're talking about. So, like, say for example, my loud playing was mostly in the context of salsa. I played salsa basically for a living. Most like my performance income, 90% of my income came from salsa gigs for about 20 years. And you have to have an oral image in your head what that sounds like. That's the first requirement. Because remember, because it's got to be subconscious, not conscious. You can't have someone say, "Oh, do this with your lip, do this with your tongue," because anything you do like that will offset that balance and make it worse. Our subconscious mind doesn't work like that. Our subconscious mind will find how to make that balance work within the parameters that produce a good sound. But you have to first have a aural image in your head of what that sounds like. So then the second thing is that you have to be hearing yourself in that context. And a lot of times, what you're talking about, I would have trouble like that because I couldn't hear myself. If you can't hear yourself on the gig, and I'm sorry to say it, I never found an answer to that problem. It's very frustrating to me. It's extremely frustrating to me. If you cannot hear yourself, let me turn that light off. If you can't hear yourself on the gig, then you will have balance issues. Now, that book by Bob Finley talks about, he has, I think, an entire chapter on playing by feel. That happens later. After years and years and years of playing in that context and making that work, then you can go to a gig where you can't hear yourself and just do what you always do and can't hear yourself at all, but you just do what you do and it comes out all right. If you don't have that background, it won't work. So that's my best. I wish I could give you the kind of answers the other guys will give you. Do this, do that, do this, do that. I don't think there is a do this. I don't think there is a do that. Sometimes those guys might get lucky and tell you to do something that makes a difference. I think most of the time it's like playing the lottery. And I'm not saying you shouldn't try doing some of the stuff that those guys say. I tried all of it. Yeah, so to me, it's just not reliable. This other thing where you want, I call it going through the back door. I think of the subconscious stuff as the back door. And if we approach the solution through the back door, it's far more consistent. It takes more time. It takes more patience. There's more of a head game involved when we do that, but it's a much better way to approach it. Hello, Seppo. Nice to see you. EM Group says, I started learning trumpet at 52 with my 10-year-old son. 2 years later, we jammed together every night to jazz background tracks. Very wonderful. Very nice. I've listened to a lot of your advice, and it has helped us both. Well, wonderful. I'm glad to hear that. Keep doing what you are doing, sir. Well, thank you. He says, we literally played along to the Buena Vista Social Club album last night. That's nice. Bonsoir, Marioli. I don't know how to say that, but all right. Yeah, so I remember in the early years of TPIN, that's the Trumpet Player International Network, I used to scoff at the people who said, don't think about it, everything will work itself out. And I knew that was wrong, but I didn't know that it was also correct. And part of that was because, the way it was presented made it sound like it's either this way or that way. Actually, it has to be both. Now that I have read, there's a great article I read about competence long time ago, talking about skill levels and stuff like that. the very first skill levels, um, you don't start off at the top, right? Your very first skill levels, you have to do like what we did in school with the times tables and the addition tables, the subtracting tables, where you repeat all of the uh like 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, all of that stuff. Hello, Karen. Uh, you repeat all that stuff at the lowest level to make it automatic. You have to. Okay, so later when someone says, "Oh, don't think so hard, just do it," right? Um, Both of those are actually true. It's not one or the other. It's when do you do which of those? I there was a guy on a gig said, "Eddie, I still want to take jazz lessons from you, but will you tell me what is the nature of your jazz lessons? What makes your jazz lessons different?" And I said, "Well, it really comes down to language. My what the biggest thing that makes what I teach different is how I approach language." And he goes, "What do you mean by language?" He says, "Are you talking about this?" I said, "No, it's not that." "Are you talking about that?" I said, "No, it's not that." He says, "Then explain to me language." And I explained it to him. Um, at that, and I told him that the only person I've ever heard, the only famous person I've ever heard that comes close to teaching language the way I teach language is Hal Galper. So I sent him a video, and I wanted to make sure that I listened to the video first. It's a Hal Galper video. And at the end of the video, Hal Galper says, "And don't do mindless repetition." And once again, I can just hear people say, "Well, Eddie, that's what you teach. You teach this mindless repetition." And I do, and I'm not ashamed of it. So here we have Hal Galper saying, "Well, you shouldn't do mindless repetition." Well, then what did he follow that up with? He says, "You should have done that when you were younger." So he's not dismissing all mindless repetition. He says you should have done that when you were younger. If you didn't do that when you were younger, then you have to do it now. So remember, Hal Gupper is one of those guys that's at the top of his field. And I think he was speaking to university people. And I can see how you can start cutting back on the repetition. I never stopped, but I do it differently. Um, I never personally stopped repeating stuff. I don't think repetition will hurt anybody. I don't believe in wasted practice. I believe in wasted time. So some people have more efficient ways of doing things, maybe. But yeah, um, so even for coming from Hal Galper, who outwardly professes that uh, mindless repetition is a waste of time, he even says, and just following up with that right away, you should have done that already. If you didn't do the mindless repetition before, then you got to do it now. Led says, uh, "I still play Clark's when I warm up before shows, as well as other exercises that get me ready." Right. Yeah. So, we do. I believe EM says, Arvin, I thought was just a given. Yeah, so personally, I don't do any of that stuff anymore. But I see what you guys are saying, right? So here's my stance. And maybe you guys have heard me say this before. I believe that what makes a great player is familiarity. What makes a great player is familiarity. The more familiar you are with the music, and it's not just music, by the way, but let's start with music. The more familiar you are with the music, the better you're going to perform it. If you, and if, let's use Hal Galper as an example. If Hal Galper has played a song 150 times, or another song if he's played it 5 times, which one would you expect to sound better? Now, sometimes there are those freak incidences when something is so fresh that we give it a new life, or the new song gives us new life. But the truth is that the deepest depths of our expression usually come from stuff that we are deeply, deeply familiar with. Okay? And that's where the repetition comes in. Now, David Caceres told me something very profound one time. He claimed, when I was talking to him, that most of his abilities came from the gigs that he was doing. And if you think about that, for the most part, most pros play the same songs on every gig. There's some variety, but if you take the whole year's worth of gigs and put it on one list, it's not a very long list. There's a lot of repetition on the stage itself. And so here's where I see the difference, right? We were talking about how when Hal Galper said, you should have done that earlier. Well, where's that line? That line is when you start performing. Because once you're on stage, you are repeating stuff over and over and over and over again. Until you get to that point where you're playing so much and you're doing Autumn Leaves 20 times a month. You're doing, you know what I mean? You're doing all these different tunes many times over because that's what you're doing for a living. Then you're getting your familiarity that way. And so familiarity applies to the songs, it applies to techniques, it applies to keys, it applies to skills, it applies to, when I say techniques, I mean stuff like double tonguing, flexibility, stuff like that. The more familiar you are with double tonguing, the better you can double tongue. The more familiar you are with great sound, the more capable you are to play with a great sound. The more familiar you are with any aspect of what we do, the more you're going to be able to do that well. And so the way I see it is each time you do something on the horn, and the beauty of it is it doesn't even have to be successful for the familiarity to grow. Now, we of course, we always strive to do our best. Don't get me wrong. But let's say, for example, you play the Petrushka ballerina dance or whatever it's called, pa 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 pa, and you crack the last note. That doesn't mean it doesn't count as a layer of familiarity. So you see me when I talk about familiarity, I often do this because what I see in my head when it comes to familiarity is layers of snow. I love that analogy, right? Layers of snow. Each time you do something, okay, let's say we're talking about a song. Every time you play that song, a new layer of familiarity, like a blanket of snow, comes down. And then you hear the song on the radio, another layer comes down. You hear the song again, someone else playing it, another layer comes down. You go to a jam session, you play it at the jam session, another layer of familiarity comes down and rests on top of all those other layers. And then over the course of a lifetime, for a specific song, or in this case, I'm just talking about a specific song. Over the course of a lifetime, you can have layers of snow for that song that are 6, 7, 8 foot deep. That is somebody I would like to hear play that song. You see what I'm saying? That's somebody I would like to hear play that song. I don't care if they're famous. I don't care if they can play fast. I don't care if they can play high. What interests me is that depth of familiarity because they're going to have something to say on that song that other people don't have because of their familiarity. They may be lacking in other areas of their trumpet skill set, but because they have so much familiarity with that song, there's something of value there to hear. Now, when we apply that to the staples, the Arbin book, the Clark book, you do that stuff over and over and over again, and it builds your familiarity. If you're doing the Clark stuff, you're building familiarity with that technique. The Arbin stuff is technique and musicianship and techniques. Don't get confused between technique and techniques, because you heard me say earlier, techniques include stuff like double tongue and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so I'm not anti Arvin, I'm not anti Clark. It's just that my stuff works better for my system. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, Sippo says, I just had a conversation with a colleague of mine. Considering that Nicholas Salimsky's The Source of Scales and Melodic Patterns, I had not seen this book until now. To me, it seemed to very interesting book. Are you familiar with that book? Yes, I've got it, and I've looked through it. Um, I, I I think the original intention of the book was for composers. I, Maybe I'm wrong. I know composers use it as a philosophical starting point. Um, here's the thing. I love all of that kind of, I would call that advanced theory. I love all of that. Okay. To me, that's just, there's no way that can't enhance what it is that you do on the horn. That said, I still think that what's most important is the musical side. So, what we have a problem with the Slominski, I don't think that's the correct spelling. I might be wrong. Um, The problem is that how do you make music out of it without just making sounds? So I know that John Coltrane studied out of that book, but I'm hard pressed to find anything of Coltrane's that actually put that into action. So if you practice from the book, it's not very practical for us as trumpet players because the range is too high. You know, I mean, I've done a lot of it. Anyway, so I like the book. I have the book. I've studied the book. I understand how it's structured. There's just not a lot of use for it in what I do. EM says $32.95 on Amazon. Is it worth it? So basically, what he does is he breaks the scale out of the octave. So I think there's an octave and a half scale, and there's a 2-octave scale, and these don't repeat. So yes, it's not. It's music theory up to the next level. So Paulus says, how should I be tonguing the swing eighth notes and the first all-state jazz etude? So let me tell you first to ignore his slurs. Okay? If you try to play the slurs he has written, it will mess you up. So don't try to. If you listen to what I'm doing on the video, you'll notice that I am not playing the slurs he's got written. Now, let me tell you this, that in most jazz, slurs are not written. The only time we write slurs out is if we specifically want that slur combination. So, in general, and this rule has to be broken sometimes, but in general, we tongue the upbeats with a legato tongue, and we slur to the downbeat. Let me see if I can pull up a copy of this. Okay. All right. So I'm going to play. Oh, so there's also the triplets. So also the triplets should be. So let's talk about the triplets immediately because that's the very first measure. The triplets will always be slurred completely. And then we're going to start. So the general rule is slur the upbeats to the downbeats. So he starts on an upbeat. So we're going to go, here's the triplet. Okay. We're going to slur the F sharp before that to that. And then we're going to slur all the way to the F sharp. We're going to slur all that. Maybe I might tongue the F sharp. Maybe. Same thing with the next measure. I'm going to slur from the G, not from the G sharp. See, he starts to slur on the G sharp. I'm going to slur all of that. Then we just follow the slur, the upbeat to the downbeat. Okay, we're gonna have, so that's the general answer to your question. We legato tonguing, slur the upbeat to the downbeat, tongue the upbeat, slur the upbeat to the downbeat, and then break that pattern when it sounds too monotonous. When we have the triplets, you encompass the triplet into that whole thing. I hope that answers your question. If it's not detailed enough, just let me know. EM says it's only 13, just bought it. Thanks for the tip. EM says it's spelled correctly. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I got my hair cut yesterday. I feel everything on my head now. Any other questions? Yep. Could I talk a bit about mouthpieces for jazz? I don't think that way. I know a lot of people do. I'll have to tell my barber. He says I have a good haircut. So mouthpieces for jazz. I don't think. Let me instead tell you how I think about why we would change mouthpieces. I change mouthpieces according to the size of the ensemble or how loud the ensemble might be. So, for example, if I have a gig where it's just me, then I play on my deepest cup, and it's deep enough that my whole pinky to the knuckle will go to there. That's how deep my deep cup is. Okay? That's for gigs that I'm playing by myself and it's not going to be loud. Now, what if I'm playing by myself? Like, for example, Kentucky Derby 2 years ago. I had a gig playing by myself at a bar where they were watching the Kentucky Derby, and the crowd noise was hugely tremendous. It was extremely loud. Then the same deal. This doesn't work. So anytime I have to make my sound louder, I'll use a more shallow mouthpiece. So if I have a salsa gig on the other extreme, if I have a salsa gig, I will play on my Warburton 2SV or sometimes 2S. So to me, it has nothing to do, whether it's classical or jazz, has nothing to do with the equipment. It has to do with how loud I have to project. So, for example, I once played a gig that was me and a French horn player. That's it. It was a wine tasting secret society. Something about Bordeaux wines, and it was at a country club with the old oak walls and stuff like that. Very quiet, it's a very stately kind of gig. And so I didn't have to project. I'm playing with a French horn player. So I used my biggest mouthpiece for that. In fact, The reason I remember that is because it was my first time using this mouthpiece on a gig. Now, I play this a lot at home, but on a gig, not so much, because most gigs are loud. So I will either use on a public gig a C cup or a D cup or even an E cup. If you're talking about box sizes, and once again, so one of the things I look for when I show up to the gig is, what is the bass player playing? That's a pretty good indicator. If the bass player is playing an electric bass guitar plugged into the amplifier, then I'm not going to play on a big mouthpiece. I hope that makes sense. I also take into consideration not wanting to bury the lead guy. So if I'm playing second trumpet, third trumpet, I might play a deeper mouthpiece, not because I want to have a better sound or anything like that, but because I don't want to bury the first guy. I don't want to project so well that the first guy has to work harder. And I don't mean bury in a competitive sense. I don't mean that. And the guys I work with know that about me. I'm not. I don't play those kind of games. I'm actually truly considerate of the job I have to do to make them sound better. EM says that is extremely good advice and makes total sense. Thank you. You're welcome. So yes, to me, it's a physical thing. Yeah, any other questions? I feel the same way about instruments too. There's not a jazz trumpet or a, we don't have jazz trumpets and classical trumpets. It doesn't work like that. We have, Palace says, how do you feel the 16th note triplets? How do I feel the 16th note triplets in Etude 2? and 19. 14. Oh, that's just a, okay, those are two entirely different things. In measure 14, that should just come out like a glissando. In 19, that's part of the double time. So just like what I said about swinging the triplets in that first etude, you want the slur to encompass. So the slur starts on the measure on the note before the triplet. We're talking about in measure 19. We start slurring, tongue the D, slur all those notes in the triplet. The next note you're going to tongue is the C natural on the way down after the slur, after the triplet. So that's different. Those two are entirely different. EM says, if you were looking for another topic, would you please explain the difference between when you would use a cornet instead of a trumpet? So, if I had that luxury, I would use the cornet for songs that were more cornet-y in the sense of how the fingers work, right? Because the valve stroke of the cornet was shorter. And therefore, for playing fast stuff, the cornet is foreseeably faster. Now, most people don't play fast enough to push that stroke to its limit. And most people, so the difference between cornet and trumpet, I don't think most people, most students, play well enough to know the difference. And what do I mean by know the difference? Maybe know the difference is the wrong way to say it. Play well enough to make to utilize. Let's say it that way. I don't believe that most people play well enough to utilize the difference between the two instruments. But let's say, for example, let's say you've learned properly the Carnival of Venice. It would be a lot easier to play the Carnival of Venice at tempo on a cornet, a real cornet, not one of these modern things that are basically shorter trumpets. I'm talking about a real cornet. It would be a lot easier to play that song on a real cornet than it is to play on a trumpet. The trumpet's clumsy because of that stroke, because of the harmonics. So yeah. He says, Louis Armstrong started with cornet, and I am confused as to how he was able to get a good sound out of it for the type of music he was playing. Is Yamaha student cornet a real cornet? I have no clue. I don't know. Probably not. That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean by it. So basically, when we're talking about the student instruments, there's no difference except one is shorter than the other. I'm talking about the design. Of course, there's quality difference. But no, a Yamaha student cornet compared to a Yamaha student trumpet, I wouldn't say that there's much of a difference. Okay? The real difference is, so remember I started the whole Q&A off talking about that complicated balance of all these things that has to happen for us to get a good sound. I actually believe that until we get that balance right, most of the instruments we play don't make a difference. They don't make a significant difference. The exception is, of course, if you've got a terrible instrument, you can have an instrument that's so bad that it makes things worse. But without going there, if we stick to the regular brands, and Yamaha would definitely be a good brand. Yamaha, Bach, Shoki, um, Benj, Besson, all of these brands, if you're using their instruments that are well crafted, you don't know the difference. You can't utilize the difference until you get that balance to happen. And so you might say, well, Mr. Lewis, I do get that balance to happen. But when do you get it to happen? See, this is the thing. And I should have pointed this out at the beginning. You can go home and play your exercises that you're familiar with. There's the familiarity again. You can go home, play the exercises you're familiar with, play the music you're familiar with. You're inside your comfort zone. You're inside your little box, and you can have that balance then. But then you go to the gig, and you're playing 3, 4, 5 times as loud as what you play when you're at home. Now the balance has changed. If you have to play louder, the balance changes. If you have to play softer, the balance changes. If you have to play in a different style, the balance changes. Anything you do to break yourself out of that comfort zone, now you're not in balance anymore. So when I say that you won't notice the difference, I'm talking about in the overall picture, not just on that little box of things that you're already familiar with. Seppo says, how do you produce different colors of tone? Is it fully unconscious, or can it be also conscious? It can be conscious too, but it won't always sound good. I believe that the way we produce different colors of tone, how you're putting it, is to hear that. We have to saturate our ears in that. We have to spend time. So when I've listened to so much salsa, and I can make what I do sound like that. When I first started, I couldn't do that. And it wasn't something physically that I did. It wasn't raising my tongue arch or any of that kind of stuff. That just puts you out of balance. See, that's the problem with doing stuff. If you do it consciously, you can get a different tone. You can say, I'm gonna raise my tongue arch, or I'm gonna lower my tongue arch. That will give you a different tone. But will it sound good? Will it be appropriate for what you're trying to do? And that appropriateness is, I think, entirely subconscious. I think being able to do that stuff consciously is way, way beyond our capabilities, our mental capabilities. Cardo says, Eddie, suppose that I haven't found my ideal mouthpiece. Would it be possible to achieve my maximum potential anyway with any other mouthpiece? I believe so. I think actually, when you're playing on a mouthpiece that falls short of what's perfect for you, it's actually probably a good thing for this balance stuff. Because think about it, you put it off balance. You put it off balance, and now you have to learn how to rebalance all of that stuff. But and by the way, this balance that I'm talking about it does include your equipment. So yes, if you play on a big mouthpiece, on a small mouthpiece, on changing the throat, changing the backbore, all of this stuff will help you subconsciously become more familiar with the process of playing the trumpet. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. Any other questions? So yes, the mouthpiece thing, I still haven't found my best mouthpiece. And I've got this kit with literally thousands of combinations that I could create. And I still haven't found my best mouthpiece. What does that tell you? It's a lifelong pursuit. I can tell you this. I'm far, far closer to it than I've ever been. Thanks to that mouthpiece, I'm so much closer now. Not mouthpiece, the mouthpiece kit. Thanks to the mouthpiece kit, I'm far, far closer to uh, getting where I want to go with that. All right, any other questions? We're counting down. This was a good one. Lots of really good questions today. Oh, mouthpiece safari is expensive and gives you a headache. That's right. Yes, so there's this concept that I teach. Uh, it started off with music, but now I apply it to everything, right? The musical version of this is stated this way. The greatest music occurs within the overlap. The greatest music occurs within the overlap. And I got to tell you guys a story. I was on a gig. You guys know that I compose and I'm a performer. I was on a recording session, and the guys in the section were complaining about the guy that wrote the music, saying this is terribly written music. Oh, I can't believe this. I can't believe that. Oh, complaining about the way the music was written and all that stuff. Then on the break, the guy that wrote the music was in the booth, and I go into the booth and he's going, the guy that wrote the music is complaining about these guys that just won't play his music right. And the way I saw that was two opposing groups stopping short of the overlap. I was taught as a performer that you do your best to play what they put in front of you. And I was taught as a composer that you write, and you should be striving to write what people can play. These people that say, oh, this is a great piece because nobody can play it, that's not a great piece. That's not the way to be thinking about a great piece. A great piece sounds like nobody can play it, but is easy to play. Okay? Now, I say that this is where I got this concept from, this philosophy. If you, as a composer, compose in a way that makes it easier for people to play, and then as a performer, you play in a way that you're going to embrace everything that's put in front of you, you have this overlap between those two philosophies. And in that overlap is where the best music happens. Now I've applied that to all sorts of things in life, because this overlap is important in all things. And one of the examples I like to give is the marriage relationship. If the husband does what he's supposed to do in a way that makes it easier for the wife, and the wife does what she's supposed to do in a way that makes it easier for the husband, that's where the best marriage is going to happen. So same thing as for teachers. If the teacher puts the responsibility on himself so that the students can learn, and the students put the responsibility on themselves so that they can learn from the teacher, you have that same overlap. You can do this with almost everything. You have the employee, you have the employer, you have the employee, you have the band leader, you have the band mates, right? if everybody does more than their job, if everybody takes part of the responsibility that belongs to somebody else, that's when everything goes well. It's when we fall short, when when one side stops here and the other side stops here, the music is terrible. Okay? So why am I saying that? Um, I can't remember why I started saying that, but it's a big deal to me. It's a big deal to me. You know, I even apply this to double tongue, right? We want to be able to single tongue faster than our double tongue, and we want to be able to double tongue slower than our single tongue. The best music happens between. Seppo asks, are these Q&As going all the way through the summer? That is correct. I don't take breaks. I um, I shouldn't say it that way, but we take our own kind of vacation. Okay. Um, we haven't had a vacation in a while, but yeah, when we go off, it won't be that long. And so yes, the answer is basically yes. We will have Q&As throughout. There's rarely that we won't have them. I did take that time off. Um, I guess about a month ago, month and a half ago. All right, we have enough time for one more question. Any other questions? I've been stripping wallpaper off my bathroom wall. Not fun, but I actually have been enjoying it, believe it or not. So that's what I'm going to do right now. If there's no more questions, get back in there and start. I got the top layer off. I'm just pulling the glue layer off now. And you know what they did? They put it over a bare wall, which means I've got a lot of work to do when that after the wallpaper is off. I've got a lot of work to do before I can paint it. We do all of that work ourselves. Thank you, Seppo. Nice to see you. Yeah, all the walls behind me, that's all our work. That was our first job together, Pearl and I. Yeah, I've got pictures of us where we're covered head to toe with paint all over us. We're not that sloppy anymore. Thank you, Karen. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for hanging out with us. God bless you, and we will see you next time. Thank you.